Good morning. My name is Ain Dubazani. I am a senior fintech analyst at the South African Reserve Bank, and today I am your master of ceremonies. On behalf of the South African Reserve Bank and the Bank for International Settlements, I would like to warmly welcome you to the launch of the 2025 G20 TechSprint event. It is wonderful to see you all. We're excited for what promises to be a morning of valuable insights and engaging discussions, all under the theme of trust and integrity in scalable and open finance. You will hear more about this as the morning progresses. To officially kick off today's proceedings, we will begin with a message from the South African Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago.
Good day. Welcome to the launch of the 6th edition of the Group of 20 TechSprint. We are honored to bring this important global initiative to South Africa and excited to bring our collaboration with the Innovation Hub of the Bank for International Settlements come to fruition. The quality of the work and the progress made are commendable and certainly something we can all be proud of. The G20 TechSprint looks for best-in-class technological innovations to address some of the challenges facing regulators around the world. This year's focus is on open finance and finding technological solutions that are scalable while enhancing trust and integrity in these systems. Trust and integrity are the two pillars that form the backbone of any resilient financial system. Consumers, businesses, and investors trust that regulated financial institutions will keep their money safe and secure. These institutions must comply with anti-money laundering and know your customer requirements to uphold the integrity of the financial system so that the source of funds is traceable. In today's interconnected digital world, technology is unlocking innovation at an unprecedented speed, spurring solutions that transcend geographical borders and enabling data portability that supports economic activity. Premised on solutions that are scalable, have cross-border capability, and are built on trust and integrity, we have identified three critical challenges for innovators to solve. The first challenge is the development of verifiable, privacy-preserving digital identity solutions. The second is the creation of a secure credit data exchange that incorporates consumer consent. And the third is the advancement of technology solutions for fraud and cyber risk mitigation. We believe that these challenges are not only globally relevant, but also what is needed on the African continent. We are looking for solutions that will bring more people into the digital economy and enable cross-border trade, especially within the African Continental Free Trade Area framework. The digital identity will enable easier know your customer identification and verification processes, allowing consumers to open accounts, apply for loans, or access government grants without time-consuming paperwork. A secure and verified digital identity for consumers will also decrease the risks of fraud and make the financial system safer and more resilient. A secure consumer-consented data exchange solution that facilitates seamless cross-border sharing of credit information will unlock small and medium enterprises access to finance. The exchange of credit data across borders in a safe and trusted environment will open up access to offerings such as real-time credit scoring or workflow automation. As the South African Reserve Bank embarks on an ambitious agenda to modernize South Africa's payment system and make a meaningful contribution to the G20 roadmap for enhancing cross-border payments, we hope this TechSprint will unlock fresh thinking and spark bolder ideas beyond what we have seen so far. Innovation must drive inclusion, build trust, and deliver a lasting impact on our continent and across the world. As the South African Reserve Bank, we look forward to continuing our close collaboration with the BIS on finding solutions that will help shape a more connected and sustainable financial world. Let us sprint.
Let us sprint indeed. Thank you to the Governor and the team at the SARB for that insightful introduction and for setting the tone for today's event. Before we continue, I would like to highlight something special about the name tags you received this morning at registration. Aligned to the G20 TechSprint's theme of growing trust and integrity in open finance, the name tag holders are plantable seed paper. So the idea is that we take them home, we remove the card that contains our name, we put it in soil, water lightly, and grow flowers. This way, just as the ideas are nurtured and developed during the TechSprint between now and November 2025, we watch fintech ideas bloom. I'm told you don't need to have green fingers, magical fingers, to grow these flowers. So no excuses. I'm officially challenging you all to plant your name tags and send us photos of your blooms. Email them to the fintech address, that is sarb-fintech@theresbank.co.za, and we will share these pictures at the G20 TechSprint Awards event in November. We now continue with opening remarks from our partners at the Bank for International Settlements. Let's have a look at the message from Mr. Augustine Carstens, General Manager at the Bank for International Settlements.
Good morning, Governor Cañago and distinguished guests. It is a pleasure to join you today for the launch of the 2025 G20 TechSprint. I would like to thank the South African Reserve Bank for supporting this important global initiative. In today's increasingly fragmented world, the G20 TechSprint is a welcome reminder that international collaboration and dialogue are powerful tools to tackle some of the most pressing challenges we face. This is the sixth time the Bank for International Settlements has collaborated on a TechSprint with the G20 presidency. Each previous edition addressed a priority identified by the G20 presidency. Examples include using technology to promote sustainable finance and development, enhancing cross-border payments and central bank settlement assets, and promoting RegTech and SupTech regulation. This year's TechSprint addresses a previously unexplored theme: delivering trust and integrity in scalable and open finance. Three sets of challenges stand out in particular. The first are the complexities of domestic and cross-border data sharing and know your customer mechanisms. The second are the barriers that small and medium enterprises face in accessing finance, especially in emerging markets. The third are the roles of fraud and cyber risks in deterring widespread adoption and trust in fast payment systems. Addressing these challenges will make financial services more accessible, inclusive, and competitive. Just as in the past, I am sure that this year's TechSprint will deliver innovative solutions to address important roadblocks in the international financial system. The theme of this year's TechSprint underscores our collective commitment to advancing the principles of scalability and financial inclusion. It ties in very well with the South African presidency's spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are, a philosophy that emphasizes how individuals are interconnected within a broader context to overcome challenges. This year's theme also addresses issues at the heart of the BIS Innovation Hub's mission. Indeed, several of the Innovation Hub's recent projects have sought to identify innovative technological solutions for closely related problems. Project Nexus, for example, has sought to standardize connections between domestic instant payment systems. This makes it easier to establish links between them, forming a single cohesive network. Project Dynamo explored making digital trade tokens programmable and transferable on a public blockchain. An important use case is to make it easier for institutional investors to finance small and medium-sized enterprises. Project LEAP has prepared central banks and the global financial system for a transition towards quantum-resistant encryption by testing hybrid cryptographic protocols that combine traditional and quantum-resistant algorithms. It future-proofs the financial ecosystem and strengthening trust and integrity. Finally, the recent launch Project Aperta seeks to reduce frictions and costs in global finance by connecting the domestic open finance infrastructures of different jurisdictions. The initial use case to be explored is in trade finance for small and medium-sized enterprises, with many more applications to follow. These projects demonstrate our commitment to driving innovation in the scalable and open finance space, paving the way for a more trusted and inclusive financial system. And we do so in collaboration with central banks, the financial sector, and innovators. But there is much more to be done. As financial technologies expand access and foster inclusivity, they also introduce new challenges. The G20 TechSprint provides us with a unique opportunity to harness the collective intelligence and creativity of the technology community to develop actionable solutions to the challenges we face. Each of the three problem statements in this year's TechSprint is designed to tackle a different aspect of trust and integrity in finance. In the first problem statement, we are inviting innovative digital identity solutions to enable verifiable, privacy-preserving data exchanges, support regulatory compliance, and facilitate secure identification of trusted participants. It is also important to empower participants to adopt the solutions unilaterally without compromising security or operational integrity, fostering trust in an interoperable manner. The second problem statement calls for solutions in credit data portability. We are calling for innovative technology solutions that overcome barriers preventing small and medium-sized enterprises from accessing finance. Through consumer-consented secure credit data, sharing these solutions will reduce compliance costs, mitigate financial crime, and drive financial inclusion on a global scale. The third problem statement invites solutions for fraud and cyber risk mitigation, specifically designed for fast payment systems. Enhanced trust will be essential for widespread adoption, especially across emerging markets where digital literacy is still developing. Balancing speed and efficiency with effective risk mitigation is essential, while trust and integrity are non-negotiable for the success of fast payment systems. The G20 TechSprint is more than a competition. It is a collaborative effort to redefine the future of finance. Our collective challenge is clear: to develop scalable, adaptable, and inclusive solutions that reinforce trust and integrity across borders. The themes of South Africa's presidency, solidarity, equality, and sustainability, should inspire us to break down barriers and forge partnerships that have lasting global impact. Now is the time to turn vision into action. I call on each of you, innovators, technologists, and leaders, to seize this moment and bring forward bold, practical solutions. Let's harness the power of technology to create a financial ecosystem that not only drives breakthrough innovation, but also upholds security, privacy, and trust. Share your unique insights on building a future where every idea contributes to a more open, resilient, and inclusive financial world. May the ideas generated and partnerships forged during this event serve as catalysts for positive change, propelling us ever closer towards our shared vision of a more sustainable future. I look forward to the innovative ideas that will come out of this initiative and extend my wishes for a transformative and successful G20 TechSprint. Thank you very much. Good morning, Gordon.
Thank you to Mr. Carstens and the team from the BIS for those thoughtful remarks. They set the stage for the conversations that we will have later. Before we move on to the keynote address, we invite you to take a moment to watch a short video that captures the spirit, purpose, and vision behind the G20 2025 TechSprint. It brings to life the opportunities we are trying to unlock and the challenges we are hoping innovators will help us solve. Let's have a look.
Innovation is about constantly reimagining what's possible across borders, sectors, and systems. From the days of barter to the rise of global trade routes, humanity has always found new ways to connect and exchange value. The financial ecosystem is rapidly evolving. Advances in digital technology and open finance are expanding access to essential financial services, empowering individuals and businesses, fueling economies, and supporting livelihoods. But small and medium enterprises still struggle to access funding and new markets. Meet Wandile Zondo, co-founder of Thesis Lifestyle, a streetwear brand from Soweto founded 20 years ago. He is now trying to expand beyond South African borders. Like many small businesses, Wandile is burdened by unreliable data, outdated systems that rely on paper trails, and intermediaries. These are the barriers keeping opportunity out of reach.
I think the cost of the red tape, honestly, is just in both ways, money and time. For SME, I've realized that, especially in the clothing industry, you have to work 6 months ahead. So the cash flow, it plays a huge impact.
The world needs agile systems that enhance access to safe and open finance, easing cross-border trade. Under South Africa's G20 presidency, the South African Reserve Bank, in partnership with the Bank for International Settlements, invites the world's brightest minds to develop bold and scalable solutions that promote trust and integrity in finance. This year's TechSprint challenges innovators to build real-world solutions in 3 key areas: digital identity, credit data portability, fraud and cyber risk. These solutions will lay the groundwork for financial services that are more inclusive, secure, and interoperable.
I'm not an IT person. I'm not a policy maker. I'm an entrepreneur. I want to trade, but I know the answers lies with automation. It lies with policy making it easy. With just a click of a button, money is transferred from South Africa to Uganda or Nigeria.
A robust open finance ecosystem will unlock opportunities for entrepreneurs like Wandile and millions of others, allowing them to trade, grow, and thrive. Submissions close on 20 June 2025. Shortlisted entries will each receive a $5,000 stipend, and the winning solution will receive $30,000. Winners will be announced in November in South Africa.
A great introduction to the journey ahead. We urge all of you to spread the word far and wide. The deadline, as a reminder, is 20 June. And turning back to those name tags, we make it easier because your name tag includes a QR code that links directly to the SARB's webpage, where you'll find all the competition details. You can also visit www.bis.org for further information. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Deputy Governor Mpho Modise. Please welcome her to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. Am I allowed to also enter the competition? I could do with the 30,000. But welcome, everybody. It is such an honor to be here. I hope you are as excited as I am. This is part of the work that I do, and I'm quite excited about the launch of the TechSprint. I think what has been key for us for a number of years is how do we, as central bank, manage this complicated relationship between fintech and regulation, and that should be the core, or that will be the core of my message today. As you may be aware, technology has been with us, especially in the financial services, for decades now. And unfortunately, technology doesn't wait for us to move. It moves faster than we can anticipate. But the term fintech really started getting some momentum in 2008 after the global financial crisis, and we saw how important it was during the pandemic in 2020, where we had to move away from what we knew, and technology played a key role. Now, as regulators, what we then tried to do was to understand the technology, to try and understand it first, and then secondly, decide or determine the impact of this technology on providing some of the financial services that they, how customers perceive this technology, and are there any risk that we as central bank need to look at, especially impacting the financial stability. Now, to assist us as regulators, I think the key was to have innovation facilitators, and these guys have been critical in helping us identify regulatory gaps or clarity that is required, looking at things like sandboxes for firms where innovation products and services are tested in a controlled environment. So that was one thing that we had to implement. But now what we are facing is that there has to be regulatory clarity that is provided for this new product, such that we don't suffocate innovation, but we ensure that it is in an environment where there is always financial stability, and we minimize the risk that we can have in our financial system. So such has prompted us as regulators to respond better to some of these innovations, but also to start preempting future challenges that we can see. Now, the whole concept of fintech, which is not necessarily universally defined or adopted, but is a term that we use, and this basically describes for us. It describes the latest phase in the evolution of fintech, and this includes different technologies or intelligent technologies such as the application programming interfaces, artificial intelligence, as well as your blockchain-based technology. Now, what has been critical for central banks is what is the specific role that we play and what are we responsible for in such a space. And that's something that we've been trying to establish, and it's work in progress, I guess. So basically, our responsibilities as central bank is to maintain financial stability and the safety net of the financial system. And how do we then achieve this objective in the context of fintech, especially striking a balance between promoting innovation, but also guarding against the risk. I think that's why we appreciate such innovation ideas, because you basically asking very smart people to come up with fintech ideas that take into consideration some of the regulatory constraints that exist, and that's why we are excited to bring this fintech or the sprint. So what is it that we want to achieve today? I think what we want to achieve today is establishing the link between central bank, other public sector role players, where they gather technology, use technology, and help us to design policies or regulation that are fit for purpose. Now, these competitions are, what is good about them is that they are time-bound, and they are designed to address very specific challenges by leveraging on the technology, co-creation, as well as collaboration. I think what we find is that we take too long to come up with ideas and to test their usefulness in the system. So with the TechSprint, it is very fast-paced, very specific, and the problem statements are very clear. So we know what problems we're trying to resolve. And I think what is also key is that the TechSprint offer a distinct opportunity to use the technologies and resolve some of the world challenges that we have. So they are very practical, and I think once, after this whole process, we will be able to use some of the findings from the TechSprints and implement those. So currently what we have been experiencing is that while the ecosystem requires empowerment for individuals, there's always a risk of fraud, there's always a risk of identity theft, and there's also a risk of data misuse. And reducing this risk will require us to enhance the accuracy and the speed of our credit decisions, support financial inclusion, as well as open doors for affordable credit, especially for those who have been overlooked in the past. So basically, good people, I think the excitement that we have is to see these ideas, to learn from the private sector, to look at how our regulations can be enhanced, can be improved, and how is it that as central banks we can manage the key responsibility of managing financial or preserving financial stability, but also not to constrain innovation. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope that this whole process will be valuable. It will add a lot of on the ongoing dialogue, as well as bring actionable steps and strategies that we will definitely take into consideration as we do our work as the central bank. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those reflections. Let me move this. Thank you for those reflections, DG. Much appreciated. We've heard some really inspiring and insightful messages throughout the morning, and this brings us to the heart of why we're gathered here today, an open, solution-focused dialogue on our key problem statements. This panel brings together a diverse set or group of stakeholders and experts to unpack challenges that we face and to explore some actionable insights. It is my great honor and privilege to invite onto the stage today, and joining me today is Benedict Nolans. She's the head of the Hong Kong Center, BIS Innovation Hub. Lyle Horsley, Head of FinTech at the South African Reserve Bank. Arif Ishmael, the Strategic Product Director with the Payments Ecosystem Modernization Program at the SARB. And Hema Vallabh, she is the co-founder of WomHub and 535 Ventures. So the structure of the panel today is I'll pose a few questions to the panelists, and please do feel free to build on each other's responses. And if time allows, we'll open it to the floor for some questions from the audience. I think we'll start with the most obvious question that is on everyone's mind, Lyle. Why and how did the SARB and the BIS Innovation Hub arrive at these specific problem statements? And also your thoughts on why a tech sprint specifically to address these global challenges.
Thanks very much, Aine, and good morning to everyone. So I think that's a really good question to kick us off, right? So let me reflect on some high-level considerations in how we shaped these problem statements. The first one is around previous G20 tech sprints and looking at what were the lessons, the solutions that came from those tech sprints, and how can we build on that for the South African tech sprint. And so we want to think about, some form of continuity from previous G20 tech sprints, but we also wanted to come up with something that hadn't been explored before. And so open finance is an area that hadn't been looked at before. Secondly, we wanted to craft these problem statements by striking a balance between developing problem statements that push that frontier of emerging technologies, but also having problem statements that are relevant to the policy agenda of global policymakers and the central banking community. The third aspect relates to our G20 presidency. So we thought about how do we develop problem statements that complement what we are trying to achieve under the G20. And the G20 priorities that specifically, I think, resonate with these problem statements relate to enhancing cross-border payments, improving the data quality for cross-border payments, and looking at things like API harmonization to enhance how data is shared within the ecosystem. And so I think there's a great synergy between these problem statements and the South African G20 agenda. And then finally, from a South Africa-specific perspective, looking at the work that the central bank is driving through the payments ecosystem modernization, we again wanted to see how do we leverage this tech sprint as an opportunity to deepen our thinking in these areas that we have prioritized as South Africa, looking at a digital identity solution, looking at fraud management capability, and looking at growing digital payments through our fast payment system. And so through those areas that we are focused on in the central bank, I think, again, there's a great synergy and complementarity to these problem statements that we have developed. And so each problem statement speaks to integrity and trust in the financial system. And then thinking about how do we build scalable solutions in these problem statements and in the solutions that we are looking to advance through these problem statements. And then to think about how do we build this trust and integrity within an open finance ecosystem. And so those are really the sort of high-level reflections on how we came up with these problem statements. So thinking about then a tech sprint specifically and why a tech sprint. So I think tech sprints are a unique, innovative tool for central banks. It was previously, I think, widely used within the technical technology community, but I think now central banks are also looking at how you can leverage tech sprints. And I think let me touch on a few just key points. So the one is that tech sprints do enable this rapid joint learning. So it's a joint learning between innovators and policymakers and financial sector regulators. Secondly, I think it allows for a very structured and focused collaboration on policy priorities that have been identified by the regulators. And then thirdly, it allows us to hear new voices, and it allows us to see new technologies in practical ways. And finally, it is this time-bound exploration. And so we do develop these prototype solutions really quickly, and potentially those solutions can then be taken to market. I'll stop there. Thank you, Aine.
Thank you, Lyle. Benedict, based on your extensive experience with building solutions and also co-leading these G20 tech sprints, can you reflect on how the BIS measures success of these tech sprints. And while I have you, can you maybe share some success stories and learnings from the past that we can build on for this iteration of the tech sprint, and the value that you see in continuing with these tech sprints as an annual collaborative effort under the G20 presidencies?
Thank you. So I'll bolt onto what Lal said. So in general, these tech sprints are really a unique opportunity, as he said, to work with the central banks. I don't think there is another tech sprint globally, frankly, where you have the opportunity to work with 63 central banks globally, because the BIS de facto is an international organization of 63 central banks, including the SARB. Secondly, I am very glad to say that this is the first of these tech sprints on the African continent. And this is very important because with tech sprints, you tend to get applicants from the local ecosystem as well as the global ecosystem. But for example, last year was Brazil, so we had a lot of applicants from LATAM. The year before was India, we had a lot of applicants from India. At the end of the day, you will see the winners tend to be quite well distributed, but there could be a lot of applicants coming from Africa. And that is personally what I look forward to, because I look forward to seeing a new sample. I look forward to seeing new ideas, and I look forward to seeing them specifically in your African context. And for example, this SME needs that we saw exemplified in the video. Now, in terms of how we define this tech sprint and then pursuant to it measure success. So first of all, as Lal also explained, we do reflect about the G20 themes. And if you look at these problem statements, problem statement 1 actually links quite well to the theme of solidarity, problem statement 2 to equality, and problem statement 3 to sustainability. And in terms of the priorities, there are priorities in the G20 agenda on inclusive growth, and also priorities on the use of AI for sustainable development. So inclusive growth, you could see links very well to problem statement 1 and problem statement 2, whereas AI for sustainable development links very well with problem statement 3, because to identify, for example, fraud and cybersecurity breaches, the use of AI is just going to boom in this space. So how do we measure success? The first way that we measure success is a simple one, is that we need to gather enough really high quality proposals and ideas. And so every year we have around 90 to 110 applicants. And of these 90 to 110, 15 are shortlisted, and they get announced in August. So for any startup or any startup that is listening to an association or here in the room, being one of these 15 is really valuable, because it gives you a global stage that you will not get in other ways. Because, as said, it is a unique global stage because it's linked to both the G20 agenda and the central banking community. So that's our first sign of success, is when we have really high quality applications. And so far, for all the years of our operation, we've had that. And you can look at the winners of the prior tech sprints. The second way to measure success is whether these people can work with us. Now, it's only going to be a small subset who manage to get to that end outcome. But for some of you, that would be your goal. So I will give you examples. For the Indonesia Tech Sprint, one of the winners is a party that we're now working with in the context of one of our global multi-CBDC projects. Secondly, in the context of India, 2 of the participants we worked with in our projects, one in Project Tourbillon out of Switzerland, and another one in the context of Aperta, which is out of Hong Kong Center, which is under me. Then thirdly, we did quite a lot on green finance, intersecting between COP and also the G20. So for example, we did a COP28 tech sprint together with the UAE, and the Central Bank of the UAE has been piloting one of the solutions there for climate digital twins. Brazil is now was carrying this last year into their G20 tech sprint, and now into COP30. So for the green agenda, there is a large connectivity across the tech sprints for COP and the tech sprints for the G20. And sometimes I would say success is also the opposite. I have seen one of our very early stages projects, which was called Project Genesis, which involved the connection between tokenized bonds and IoT devices to monitor greenwashing. We have seen that come back in terms of TechSprint participants in the Brazilian TechSprint last year. Then the third way to measure success is if we can help those shortlisted applicants and winners to establish their solutions. And if we can help them connect to other parties in the ecosystem, for example, other central banks. So in conclusion, we showcase you globally, we may work with you, and we connect you. And ultimately, the ultimate sign of success for us is if the startups are successful at establishing their innovative solutions in the market.
Thank you for those insights. Arif, apologies, Hima, turning to yourself. As the founder of WomHub, which is a boutique Pan-African incubator for females, founders in STEM, and a partner at 535 Ventures, which is a venture capitalist firm with over a decade of backing startups that tackle meaningful challenges. Do the problem statements resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, these problem statements resonate with me both personally and professionally. I think I come from the complete opposite side of the spectrum to Lyle and Benedict, where I am who you're solving for, right? So I'm a first-generation entrepreneur, a female person of color in Africa, pile the challenges on. And on a personal level, I've faced these challenges firsthand, having to have bootstrapped my businesses because the credit models and access to financing aren't built for people who look and sound like me. I started my first organization back in 2006, and now we've built a group of companies. So the challenges I've walked along my journey is now what we're doing from a professional perspective. So at WomHub, we basically run boutique incubating accelerator programs specifically supporting female-led innovation, right? And basically, a lot of our founders face trust deficits in the financial system, especially when it comes to things like identity verification, fraud mitigation, and just basic access to financing. So at the moment, we're working with startups because these founders shouldn't have to, have the same challenges I faced 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So how do we support and improve these systems so the founders building their businesses don't have to be hindered by these problems? But none of this matters if we can't move capital into the hands of founders, and especially women founders. We all know the stats around how little VC funding goes to female founders. And especially, so in the 535 portfolio, we have, it spans fintechs, agritechs, health tech, SaaS platforms. These are all enterprise businesses and industries where if you can't build on a secure platform, your business will collapse. So it's an iceberg, right? What we see is the tip, but it's so deep, and until we can solve that bottom bit, these startups aren't going to succeed. And while we're talking about solutions from the top down, we also have to work bottom up. But it's not all around. The challenges also present opportunities, right? From where I'm sitting, we've been working bottom up. These startups can actually leapfrog these negative legacy systems that are so hard to change from within the banks and within the, these big institutions. But I think when we think about solutions, inclusivity has to be at the core. We can't just solve for large corporations. We have to solve for SMEs, for solopreneurs. We have to solve for diverse founders, those who are at the coalface of the challenges, but also again the opportunity. If we don't support them, we're not going to see a change. So it's not an either or, but it certainly is an and in both. And I think when we think about why the TechSprint is the right vehicle, then is, again, coming from where I come from, how often do you get to sit in a room with the regulators and the people who are making the decisions? The average entrepreneur doesn't have access. We can't just pick up the phone and phone the governor of the central bank, for example, right? But when we sit in rooms like this here, and at the work we do at WomHub, we then at least have a voice for those entrepreneurs who otherwise, it's the Wandiles of the world, it's me, it's the female entrepreneurs in particular that we work with who need to actually bridge that gap to what you're saying and what we're experiencing, and how do we then solve for that?
Arif, a similar question to you, but specifically in the context of the payments ecosystem modernization. project. Are the problem statements relevant to PEM and other or similar digital public infrastructures around the world? And how do you see these problem statements advancing the innovation agenda globally?
I'm very thankful. Lyle has answered the question crystal clearly right up front. This is well aligned with the PIM. But I want to take the opportunity of maybe commenting on two things. Again, in the spirit of the dialogue. The first is, Hema, you do have access to the regulators, and I have to say that. You have access to the regulators through the Regulatory Guidance Unit at the SARB. It's been created a number of years ago, so certainly you're not on your own. But I also want to latch on to something that you talked about, which is the trust deficit. And I want to tell a little story. I won't take too long. I want to tell a little story about my first-hand experience 2 weeks ago with this trust deficit. But before I turn to the story, let me confirm that the payments ecosystem modernization is a significant program at the SARB. In fact, it runs in parallel with two other strategic programs or objectives. Of course, monetary policy, price stability, and financial stability. And next to it lies our efforts on modernizing payments. But as Pradeep would have said many times in industry sessions, the nature of that program is quite large. There's about 9 different building blocks, and you've probably heard this many times before. Things like modernizing the RTGS, stimulating greater adoption of the faster payment system, and so on. But I would argue that if we don't get 3 things right, we would struggle. They're foundational. What are they? Digital financial ID, which aligns with the TechSprint. Okay? Fraud in faster payment system. Okay? If we don't get that right, we're going to be in trouble. And then Gita Erling often reminds us that data and open data lies at the heart of new services. So I think we're inspired that the TechSprint kind of focuses in on this. And is it relevant for the PEM? Absolutely. Have we done work in this domain? Yes, we have, specifically for digital financial ID. We've run 3 proof of concepts, but I think we humbly would look to the TechSprint, Megan Brown and so on, who leads our fraud stream, to look at what comes out inspirationally, as has been put by Governor and Augustine Carstens, and Let's Sprint. Very briefly on the story and why this theme is really important. I was in a police station about two weeks ago, nothing serious. I was just doing an affidavit, and there was an old woman who came in who was complaining about having fraud using a faster payment system here in South Africa. And she couldn't understand it. It was a Sunday, and she was trying to understand what she needed to do with the police. And I was struck by this, that she did not know how to navigate her query, right? And as I listened, I couldn't help but thinking about the TechSprint and thinking of how easy it would have been for her if she could have had a digital financial ID linked to a query system that resolved her issue. I won't be long-winded, but I think the essence of it is really that this theme and its focus is, I think, absolutely relevant at this point in time as digitalization progresses.
Thanks, Arif. I think that's really good news to Lyle and Benedict, the teams who formulated it, the feedback from yourself and Himba on the problem statements. To turn slightly, in his remarks, Mr. Carsten shared thoughts on projects at the BIS Innovation Hub that are very closely related to the problem statement. Benedict, what innovations, whether they're technological, regulatory, or structural, are you most excited about that could redefine trust at scale in global finance?
Mm-hmm. That's a difficult question, very philosophical. But in the Innovation Hub, we seek to create what we call public good outcomes, or we seek to solve where we see market failure. So if you look at these past tech sprints, you will see broadly 2 areas of focus. One is on cross-border payments, and the second one is on grain. So cross-border payments, in my view, is an area where we want more public good outcomes. So within countries, I think there is quite a lot of progress, and it depends on the country, but including here, it seems in South Africa, you have solid payment systems. The issue is when you want to cross borders, and you saw that in this example, for example, of this SME in the video who wants to go across borders. That's where things get more difficult. So for example, if you want to go open an account in that other country, you have to travel to that country, you have to bring your documents. That is not very convenient, right? And that is still largely how it is being done. Secondly, cross-border payments also, they can be quite slow and they can still be quite expensive, specifically if you look at the size of the embedded costs in those cross-border payments. So a lot of our effort in the BIS-IH has been focused on seeking to resolve this. And that makes sense for the BIS-IH because we are the congregation of those 63 global central banks. So we focus not on the solution of one specific central bank, which we leave to the central bank, but on the collaboration, the things where things are not going well in a cross-border context. So again, that's a public good outcome focus. The second one, you could say, is in the area of sustainability and green, which also falls under the presidency and has been under the presidency for very long. Green is a market failure. We all know this, right? So there is a continuation of climate damage. And consequently, we have tried to explore many solutions in the context of green finance that could help our planet to go on a better direction, so to say. So these are our past themes. Now for this year, as highlighted by the other panelists, I am also very excited about digital financial identity. I think that we can do a lot of work on all these topics, including payments, but without this foundation of digital identity, it remains very difficult, and you remain in an outcome of closed systems, closed loops. And the closed loops are where the costs come in, because it's always like this. If there's a closed loop, you can price it higher. So I think this is critical. Secondly, as said, on the data portability, I just gave an example. If this SME can much more easy open account offshore, that would be good for this SME. And on the third topic, I do think that AI is moving so quick and generative AI is moving so quick that the issues of deep fakes will lead to huge fraud issues. So at this stage, while AI has a lot of good opportunities, we also need to be aware about this risk. And consequently, we need to think about it in tandem because the innovation is happening at the same time. So in sum, I'm excited about quite a lot of these things, as you can tell. And that's why we're here this year again. And again, I'm particularly excited this year to be here in Africa and to see your solutions to these problems.
Fantastic. Hema, I want us to spend some time and just speak specifically about problem statement number 2 on consumer-consented and secure credit data portability. Here we're calling for innovative technology solutions that overcome barriers preventing small and medium-sized enterprises from accessing finance. It's probably safe to assume that this is a matter that's very close to your heart. Would you share with us some of your reflections on what are some of the barriers and some of the very innovative ways that you've seen them overcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something we face on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, when we think of the barriers, there are structural barriers, there's digital barriers, there's cultural barriers, right? So we first have to unpack the barriers before we can start thinking about the solutions. And I think it's stuff we've all spoken about, but I think with a different viewpoint and how it's experienced is where the difference comes in. So lack of formal records, it sounds really simple, but it's, again, the Wandiles of the world who said the cost of KYC, both in time and money. And especially, again, I look at the lens of female entrepreneurs who often operate in the informal sector, and where non-traditional and informal financial systems exist, right? There's no digital footprint, they don't have access to a formal credit history, and that then is just a chain reaction to problems that follow. I mean, one of them becomes fragmented data, and again, we've spoken about this here. Even high-performing SMEs are denied funding because, and Benedict, you touched on this here, the data doesn't exist, so it's not portable. So, you know, you can be a great SME growing, but if no one else can access that, then where do you go from here? And then I'll come back to the age-old trust, right? There's a big trust gap. So even when the data does exist, SMEs, and again, women-led SMEs have the old, stereotypes of being so high risk, non-fundable, and borrowers just have these entrenched biases that exist, right? So that trust gap, we absolutely need to start thinking about how do we fix that. And that's sometimes really at how we score these, and again, my story, when we first, a little bit of my history, I started an organization when I was still a student. It evolved into a non-profit organization, which I then spun out into a commercial venture. And when we started the business, the commercial venture, I was a highly successful engineer. I had assets, I had a bank balance, but as an entrepreneur, when I made that swap from being a professional engineer to an entrepreneur, went to the bank to try to get some funding for my startup, couldn't get a loan, couldn't get any VC funding, so literally had to bootstrap, sold off what I could. 10 years later, it's a success story, but that's not the story for everybody, because the way I'm scored, and even to date, I say it's history, but it's actually not. Like a couple of years ago, I bought, a personal home for myself, and literally, if you put me into a scoring model, it spits me out as non-fundable. But thank goodness you have a personal banker who then will actually fight your case for you. But that's then a manual process. Until we address these credit scoring models, we're not going to get anywhere. So that trust gap, the biases that exist, is a huge problem. But again, with problems comes opportunities, and this is why I'm biased for sure, but this is why as an entrepreneur and especially a venture capitalist on the continent, why I love looking at startups in Africa is because I joke about it, but it's actually true. I always say, we're not like the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. We're not trying to put another man on Mars or, make leather out of mushrooms. Startups in Africa are solving real-world problems. It's the cross-border payments, right? Or just being able to get bank accounts to everybody. Right, so that's the type of business, and we look at 535 and the businesses we're investing in. Some examples, and I spoke a little bit about credit scoring and the problem. So, what businesses? You want some examples around businesses that are developing alternative scoring methods. And I know, Benedict, to your point, there's a huge debate around the use of AI and ML, in industry at large, especially in the financial sector. But if we can build AI and ML systems where the data is not biased, and we can remove that, that's one way of looking at alternatively scoring, whether it's individuals or small businesses. There's biases at every level: gender, geographic locations. We can actually alleviate those biases possibly, and also the behavioral signals that come with that. So we've backed one or two startups, or we're looking to who are doing work around that. The other one is around data wallets and APIs, right? So if you're looking at data, where can you store data securely and give consent to this so that can be shared, again, in a secure fashion? A bank account is one thing, but being able to then transfer that to another country on the continent with a different currency, all of that gets lost along the way. So we think about data wallets that could possibly mitigate or leapfrog, again, the legacy problem around cross-border payments and transfers. And I think the one I'm the most passionate about is also around collaborative models. So again, the governor spoke about all this work that's been done around digital identity. We're talking about here on the panel, but it's again what I said about where top-down meets bottom-up. A lot of these big institutions who are trying to solve this here, it will take a lot more time because the reality is there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's systems, there's processes as it should be, but for example, the time it goes from R&D to execution, years can pass. Whereas from a startup perspective, if there is collaboration with the governments, the regulatory bodies, with the sandbox environments where these type of fintechs can be built, it can happen at speed. So for example, at WomHub, we're doing a program with Standard Chartered, a Women in Tech program, because Standard Chartered as a bank understands that they need to move with the fintech curve and be able to innovate and move fast. But if they try to develop these solutions internally, one, it's long and speedily. Two, it's, again, the success rate of startups, if this many startups are building businesses, this many may get to the next stage, that filter becomes smaller and smaller to success. So rather for these, big institutions to support accelerator incubator programs where, organizations like WOMHUB are helping these businesses grow, and then the 1 or 2 or 3 solutions that are successful are the ones you can grow. In a big organization, that's much harder to do. So I think, again, it's very much the and in both around how do we look at these problems, what are the near-term, medium-term, and long-term successes that we need, not try to do everything at the same time. And I think, Benedict, you said this, the speed at which, tech is moving versus regulatory and that keeping up with it. It's almost like you're building the racetrack while you're driving the car, right? So if the road's not there, where are you going to go? And I think that's something that we need to work together to solve.
Fantastic. Talking about and/or problems, Lyle, how do emerging policy concepts like digital sovereignty and data portability, how are they reconciled with the need for cross-border financial openness?
Yeah, I think this is a really complex question. So I'll try and answer it, right? Anyone else can jump in on the panel as well. I think as our financial transactions become increasingly digitized, our digital footprint expands, right? And once that happens, then we're no longer thinking only about moving value from point A to point B. Then we're thinking about moving data, right? And different types of data from point A to B. Identity data, transactional data, your credit data, and so forth. And so as jurisdictions adopt open banking, open finance frameworks, and think about how to move data in a secure manner, it then also becomes important to think about, well, how does that data move cross-border, right? And how do we think about secure data transfers and data portability that moves across borders? And increasingly, it's becoming important to give users control over their data and allow users to consent where their data is shared, with whom their data is shared, and how that data is shared, right? And so we then think about, in a cross-border context and moving things outside of specific jurisdictions, how do we develop liability and trust frameworks to ensure that there's data privacy, to ensure that data is held secure and that there aren't any data breaches? And so I think developing industry standards around data protocols, around security protocols, are a useful starting point, right? And I think the project that the BIS has launched, Project Aperta, which I think they initiated in November, which looks at how to connect open finance systems across different jurisdictions. I think those kinds of initiatives and projects are really going to provide insightful learnings for us to think about data portability and how to protect data, but still allow data to move cross borders.
Thank you very much. I'm checking whether there's any other reflections.
The panel can back me up.
Yeah, whether they want to back you. But happy to move along. Arif, any thoughts from you on how we can ensure that trust in cross-border financial systems is truly inclusive and that we don't just end up reproducing old inequalities under digital guise?
This was a tough question, so I had to scribble down some notes. So I recall that my mom used to say this to me all the time, that it takes a long time to build trust and only one instant to destroy it. And so I started to talk to folks at home, people who work for us, our gardeners, our domestic folks, to try and understand the counterfactual, to kind of understand what breaks the trust in a cross-border transaction, what destroys inclusivity. And this is not surprising. These kind of 4 things that were raised by folks on the ground. Okay, it'll resonate with us. Okay, the first one was a lack of transparency. Folks don't know where their money is, how long it will take, and what it will cost, right? The second one is unpredictable delays, especially for someone sending a remittance. And I experienced this firsthand with someone who was sending it. Okay, even small delays can have massive consequences for someone sending money to someone who's ill, for example, in Malawi or Mozambique, and so on. The third one is not surprising for us. It's hidden fees and Forex markups. Okay? And these additional costs, especially if they're not disclosed upfront, can really impact folks. All right? And this is the one that I take from the example that I shared with you in the police station. Okay, no recourse across borders. If something goes wrong, you don't know who to call, right? And then the question that you ask in is, how do you design it? And I'm going to conclude very quickly that I think that trust has to be embedded in the design. And technology is just an enabler. But in thinking with the folks around what they were struggling with, here are 4 ideas. And of course, I think it's the TechSprint's responsibility to solve for these. But these are just ideas, okay? The first one I put down was radical transparency by design. Use APIs and open data standards to provide customers real-time visibility of the costs, the exchange rates, and the transaction status. The second one is an interesting one, and I'm going to latch on to what you were saying, Hema. And just think about this. It's digital receipts and proof of payments tools, okay? For migrants or SMEs, as you point out, having a verifiable, portable record of a cross-border payment builds confidence. And of course, you can use it, okay, for other services, insurance, credit, and so on. And let me finish with the last 2. So this came out from the dialogues. You've got to design with the user in mind, and I know that sounds cliche, but think about things like multilingual interfaces, okay? Many folks struggle with English as a first language, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And I'll finish off by saying, again, going back to my story on the recourse, okay, accessible recourse and dispute resolution tools are fundamental. And that's in just some ways that I think we can make sure that we don't digitize the wrong things.
Thank you very much.
Can I
Please
build on that?
do, Hema.
You know, Arif, you said something so important about it, and it's cliche for sure, but it's so true. When, you know, the user experience, the design, there's a mismatch. And I think, you know, we sit here in these fancy rooms in hotels talking around digital infrastructure and all of these things, but with our solutions and who are we solving for in the case study, right? So why was M-Pesa successful? It's because it didn't take fancy tech. It took a basic GPRS-enabled phone, which you could transfer money using an SMS. Now, not everybody has a smartphone where they can log into the FNB app and, you know, do X, Y, Z on it. So I think that part of who we're solving for, financial inclusion, especially from a tech perspective, is only as powerful as the tools or the hardware or the hardware infrastructure that people have access to at low cost. And the costs that come with that, whether it's your charger and access to electricity to charge your phone, and, you know, there's, again, a ripple effect. And I just wanted to double click on what you said, because I think it's so important to keep the user in mind when we're solving with these digital solutions.
Thank you so much for those contributions, and thank you to all the panelists. I think they provided us with some good food for thought and some very insightful reflections. I want to open the floor to the audience. We have roving mics, and see whether there are any questions from the audience. There is a gent, 2 of these there in the corner. Is there any other questions while the mic makes its way there? Okay, if you would please introduce yourself and where you're from, and who you're directing the question to. Handing over to yourself. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Terry van der Spey. I'm from a company called Open, previously Broth Markets Africa, and I'm proudly South African. My question, I guess, is directed at Arif and also at Benedict. When we talk about these great goals for TechSprint, one of the things that comes to mind is that so many fintechs and SMEs need access to infrastructure or direct market access. And traditionally, we see that these guardrails are held by institutions. So when we talk about open finance, we're dependent on these institutions to supply APIs and access for these fintechs. And I'm not even talking about the challenge of digital financial identity, which I'm a big banner carrier for as well. But this is enabling fintechs and FSPs to access payment infrastructure. I know the payment's doing great work around this, but is there more work in terms of systemic access to market infrastructure that empowers these many fintechs and SMEs to go on and create these wonderful fintech innovations that actually deliver on these goals?
Can we go for it? Or?
Please do.
Okay. So, Toby, great question. And I guess your question goes to the heart of the market structure in South Africa. And the short answer to this, and Tim's in the room as well, the short answer to this is that through the framework that's going to be released pretty soon, non-banks will get access, okay, to clearing and settlement and infrastructure, including the ability to issue e-money on your own and acquire on your own. So look forward to this framework. Of course, it's not a free ticket into the game. There has to be robustness in terms of, the same mantra that the BIS would put out all the time. Same activity, same risk, same rules. Okay? Watch this space.
Do you have any reflections?
No, I think this question is more asked in a domestic context. It is a domestic policy matter, right? Yeah. Although Aperta is trying to apply that though in a cross-border context, I would say. Yeah. But it is learning from the jurisdictions who have already adopted advanced rules on open finance.
I think maybe just to add to Toby's question, so I think there are many initiatives that we are doing in South Africa at the moment, and I think Arif has touched on the work under PEM and sort of opening up the banking system. There's also the open banking work that's happening, and then an open finance framework that we are looking to develop as well. And I think that's really a structured way where you then allow fintechs to access data from consumers, and you develop a framework around that so that it ensures trust, safety, privacy, and all of those good things, right? And so a lot of the interventions to date have been market-led, and the question we are asking is, is there a role for the regulator to provide some guidance, some steer to the market in how that data is shared, and so that you can spur that innovation and bring that inclusion into the market. So there's a lot under the watch the space section.
Definitely a lot happening. I'm going to put out one more call to the audience. There is a hand at the back there, and here at the front as well, Mahlatsi. Please do introduce yourself and who you're directing your question to. Handing over to you, Adile.
Good morning. I'm Adela Jones. I'm the enterprise architect at Nedbank for blockchain and cybersecurity. I think I'm going to direct my question at anyone in the panel. A big challenge in the digital world is real time. There's this perception that an API makes systems real time. It actually does not. A lot of our banking systems expose APIs, and sorry for the air quotes, but that is what it is. But the actual debit and credit movements still happen batch mode in a lot of systems. And that adds extreme complexity in terms of recon processes. So my question to anyone in the panel is, in terms of this new framework that we're envisioning in the local market, are we really going to look at real-time end-to-end and not just put, may I say it straight, lipstick on a pig, expose APIs, but the actual engine is still batch-driven, because that causes a lot of problem from a digital perspective. If you can have real insights of liquidity movement, real time, there is new financial engineering products we can release. But it really depends on the fact that we can really have debit and credit movements real time, not fake real time. Apologies.
Thank you for that question, Adile. With your permission, panel members, I'm going to take the second question, and then we'll answer both. Please do go ahead.
Thank you. Kahisho Dichabe from the FinTech Association of South Africa. Actually, two-pronged question. I think it's one to Benedicta regarding financial license passport. To say that, okay, well, regionally, because you're talking about globalization and cross-border payments, how do we activate, or let's say I have a license in South Africa to do cross-border payments, and why is there a need to have another license in the same jurisdiction, like let's say Mozambique or Zimbabwe, to provide similar service? And I guess it goes also to the panelists, especially from regulations point of view. How can we come up with an architecture where we are able to do cross-border payments in region, but with the same license? If I'm, yeah, I know it might be, I see. That's one question. The other one is, I think we all know quite recent, I think, Department of Home Affairs started putting bigger pricing on the calls from API point of view. And we're talking about financial inclusion, and that obviously talks about affordability for financial services and products for the masses of our people. So government increasing price for API calls, I stand to be corrected, that's my understanding. It obviously, that price need to be, someone needs to carry the cost. And I think it will end up being the end users, which are the same people that we want to include in the financial sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll hand over to the panelists. We can start with the question from Adile about making real-time payment, real-time. Any reflections?
I want to be extremely naughty and ask you the question. We have 2 faster payments, in fact 3 if you include the RTGS. Okay, what is stopping us from using these systems in real time? Okay, that's my question back to you. And then I would, on behalf of the PEM, say that as we think faster payments is quite an important payment system for us, okay, one of the things that we are thinking about, and we've talked about it in industry sessions quite a bit, is bringing the clearing and settlement closer together. So today we have, as you say, fake real time, okay? And one of the ideas, one of the concepts that we have is a pre-funded settlement model. And what that would mean is that as the clearing instruction passes through the payment instruction, the settlement happens in real time. That would solve for what you're talking about. But again, I put it to you gently, what is stopping us from moving use cases to faster payments rails? Okay? Some things that I think may be considered are things like item limits, fraud, and the use cases that are compatible with those particular faster payment systems. But again, I'm putting it to you, and I'll pause there. Should we tackle the others?
Just checking whether there's any other reflections on Adile's question before we move on to the other two. Happy. Then Arif, you can kick us off with the passporting, and we'll definitely hand over to Benedict for her reflections and thoughts as well.
Kagiso, you've asked a really important question, but a tricky one. I don't know if I've got an answer for you, and maybe there's reflections from the European example, right? But if I understood your question together it's license me once, and I can passport that license to other jurisdictions. I think that's an interesting concept, but then we need to think very carefully, again, about the activities that you're being licensed for and equivalence across jurisdictions, right? And my last thought would be, I think we need to take the lessons, especially from Europe. And I'm throwing Benedict probably under the bus in saying this, but take the lessons from there. It's not so straightforward. It's great in concept, but we need to make sure that each regulator fulfills their respective mandates.
Can I?
And I know Tim wants to come in on a response to that by the looks of it.
I can just say I think it's really a very interesting question. And before being in banking regulation, I was in securities regulation. And in securities regulation, they are actually really successful at this passporting and this mutual recognition, and specifically in the mutual recognition of funds. So for fund approval processes, they've come up with mutual recognition of each other's regimes, and then you can list a fund or sell a fund equally easy in Hong Kong as in Luxembourg. That has really spurred activity in mutual fund sector over many, many years. So I would say there definitely is precedent, but it's more so strangely in securities regulation than it is in central banking. And the question is, would it be a good idea? I definitely think it is a good idea, but even if you look at this mutual recognition of funds example, it actually does depend on the initiative of specific regulatory authorities working together. So it's still hard to scale, and so what tends to happen is, it tends to happen, but within certain unions. That's why you raised the EU, but it could also happen in an African union or something like this. But to make it a global matter has been difficult, and the only attempt that I know for fintechs that existed in this regard was at some stage there was a global sandbox that was done out of the FCA. The FCA had started with this concept of a global sandbox, and a startup could come in and say, I want to work with a regulator in that market, and that market, because these are my 3 target markets. Now, I don't have the latest on this and whether they continued this and how successful it was, but it was really a way to kind of lay the foundation for this this passporting outcome. Yeah.
I think maybe just to add on the passporting, so that this does come up more and more in conversations that we are having as well. And so I think that it's also important, at least in my own kind of thinking around the passporting issue, which often stops at the licensing piece, and to think through the life cycle of an entity, right? So you license an entity, you supervise the entity, you take enforcement action potentially against an entity, and you potentially have to exit the entity from the system. And so I think when we think about passporting and licensing passport frameworks, we also have to think about how does that happen then when you have this dual oversight, right? Who does what in the, with respect to that entity? And I think if you have different regulatory regimes and you don't have equivalence frameworks and you don't have mutual recognition, those things get very complicated to do. The licensing may be an easier piece, but then to think through the full kind of steps with that entity. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I see there's one more question.
Sorry, I just wanted to say Rwanda and Ghana have worked on something in this regard, and be definitely worth looking at. It's a memorandum of understanding that they've written, and I think within our region, it's something I really support Kagiso on the idea.
Thank you, Kim. Tim, handing over to yourself, final word, and then because we are running just on time. So Tim, please do go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought I'll weigh in on 2 of the questions that were raised, and I think the first one Arif responded to. The question relating to a non-bank access to information, perhaps, in terms of service provision. We have been called upon in our reform journey to say when we allow non-banks into the system, we should differentiate between non-banks that would like to offer added services to payments and the non-banks that would facilitate the transfer of value. That is the non-bank that will touch the store of value and enable the transfer. And for that, as Arif indicates, we are in a reform journey at the moment where we intend to allow non-banks to enter the system and clear in their own name and even settle in their own name, holding store of value. That would actually enable them to come into the system without sponsorship. But there's non-banks, specifically perhaps from the fintech space, that would like to offer added services over a payment. We need a regime to license them, and indeed the open finance, open banking would actually enable them to offer those services with consent of the owner of the data, of course. So we would have requirements for non-banks that offer added services and those that touches store of value. And both reforms are underway at the moment, one in the open finance, open banking space, and another in opening access to the system. Now, to Kagiso's question, I think in our regional context, we're saying that we should have aligned regulatory requirements and governance arrangements for infrastructures that we run in the region. The authority of local jurisdiction will authorize an entity to enter the system. They may elect to authorize them for domestic processing of transactions or even for cross-border. The rest of the authorities don't have a say for as long as the standard is met. However, we found a constraint that we're actually meeting and which is almost impossible to overcome. Once an entity from South Africa is allowed into the system, another entity from Zambia may decide not to deal with them because of their risk management frameworks of that entity. And that we cannot unlock because I choose who I'm willing to deal with, and I cannot be forced to do that. But for as long as we have aligned regulatory requirements that all jurisdictions will apply. We believe it's a fair situation where the domestic regulator allows parties to enter the system and on the rules that have been agreed by the collective. But I think we are willing to engage further with the regulated sector if we may be more enabling and if there are blockages that you see that we can help to unlock. And we open for that, and we can actually weigh in and support you.
Thank you so much for those contributions. Tim did not get the opportunity to introduce himself. That was Tim Masela, the head of the National Payment System Department at the South African Reserve Bank. We are, sorry, Rushdie, we'll pick it up in another on another occasion. I want to thank the panelists so much for sharing with, firstly, just making time to be with us today in your hectic schedules, and secondly, just for all of the insights and the thoughts that you've shared with us today. I think it was very insightful, and everybody, I think, learned something and has something to take away from it. To conclude the day's program, I would like to hand over to Lyle Horsley. She will do the closing remarks as well as a word of thanks. While she makes her way to the stage, if we can please give a round of applause to our fantastic panel.
Good morning again, everyone. So as our G20 TechSprint launch event draws to a close, the G20 TechSprint 2025 is officially open for applications. As the General Manager of the BIS highlighted in his remarks earlier, the G20 TechSprint is more than a competition. It is a collective call to action and a unique opportunity to collaborate and jointly reimagine a more inclusive, safe, and secure financial system. I would like to thank our Governor, Lesetja Kganyago, for his enthusiasm and support for this year's G20 TechSprint. I would also like to thank the General Manager of the BIS, Augustine Carstens, for his active support and encouraging us to push the boundaries of innovation. A special thanks to Benedict Nolans and her team for their collaboration and guidance in getting us to this point. We look forward to walking the rest of the G20 TechSprint journey with you. Today marks the culmination of many hours of work and many weekly check-ins. We are grateful for the support from our Deputy Governor, Modise, and Deputy Governor, Kasim, who is leading the SARB's G20 efforts. In the spirit of the G20 TechSprint, our progress to this point has truly been a team effort. I would like to acknowledge all the hard work and long hours from my colleagues at the SARB, including the teams from the International Economic Relations and Policy Department, the National Payment System Department, the Payments Ecosystem Modernization Team, the Communications Team, and the FinTech Unit. Thank you for working tirelessly to bring this event together. The bad news is that the real work now starts for all of us. I also want to thank everyone in this room and everyone who has joined us online. Thank you for honoring us with your attendance and interest in this initiative. We are fortunate to have diverse voices with us today, from fintechs, startups, academia, technologists, regulators, government agencies, venture capital firms, regulated financial institutions. We hope that these problem statements pique your interest. And we encourage each of you to share information about the G20 TechSprint within your institutions and across your networks. To the innovators, developers, and disruptors, we hope that you embrace the challenge presented by the G20 TechSprint with enthusiasm and determination. And I hope you challenge us to think differently, to think out of the box as we push the boundaries of technological possibilities. The G20 TechSprint 2025 is a first for South Africa and the African continent. This is an incredibly proud moment for all of us. We are excited to witness the groundbreaking solutions that will be developed in the weeks to come. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, just a reminder about your name tag.